The manila envelope felt impossibly heavy in Sarah Chen's trembling hands. Standing in the fluorescent-lit hallway of her apartment building, she barely registered the courier's retreating footsteps. The return address bore the letterhead of Preston Associates, Legal Services Michael's lawyers. After 8 years of marriage, her husband had reduced their life together to a stack of papers requiring her signature. Sarah's feet carried her mechanically through the door of 4 Billion, the modest one-bedroom apartment they'd called home since their university days, the same apartment Michael had once proclaimed would be temporary, just until his tech startup took off. Now, its familiar confines felt like both sanctuary and prison. In the tiny kitchen, where mismatched plates from countless thrift stores lined the cupboards, Sarah finally broke the seal on the envelope. Each piece of their collected china told a story: the blue-rimmed bowl from their first Christmas, the slightly chipped mug that had survived their cross-country move for Michael's MBA program. Back then, finding these treasures had been an adventure they shared, laughing at each piece's imperfections. "We'll look back at these one day from our mansion," Michael used to say, his eyes bright with ambition and dreams they both shared, "and we'll keep every single one to remember where we started." Sarah's vision blurred as she skimmed the cold, formal language that reduced their marriage to mere paragraphs and bullet points. Her mind drifted to their first meeting in the university library, where Michael had been hunched over programming textbooks, his wire-rimmed glasses sliding down his nose. She'd been the art student who'd helped him create pitch decks for his first business ideas, staying up late in this very kitchen, fueled by instant coffee and shared visions of the future. Sarah Chen had never set out to be anyone's wife, let alone the wife of a rising tech entrepreneur. At 22, she'd been focused on her graphic design career, helping small businesses brand themselves while pursuing her own artistic projects on the side. But Michael Chen had swept into her life like a fresh wind, full of dreams big enough for both of them. His determination had been infectious, his belief in their future together absolute. "We're going to change the world," he'd promised on their wedding day, in a ceremony so small they'd used plastic chairs from the community center. Their parents had been the only guests, but it hadn't mattered. They'd had each other, their dreams, and a love that felt unshakable. Now, at 30, Sarah stood in their kitchen clutching divorce papers, wondering exactly when that unshakable foundation had crumbled. Was it when Michael's first startup gained serious investor attention? When he'd started coming home later and later, his excitement over their shared future morphing into criticism of their modest lifestyle? Or was it more gradual, like water wearing away stone, until the gap between them became an unbridgeable canyon? The Sarah who smiled radiantly from their worn wedding photo on the fridge seemed like a stranger now, young, hopeful, and completely unaware that the man beside her would one day decide she was merely a relic of his struggling past, a reminder of humble beginnings he'd rather forget. The University of Washington's library had always been Sarah's sanctuary, especially the quiet corner on the 3rd floor, where massive windows overlooked the campus cherry trees. That autumn evening in 2006, she was sketching those same trees when a frustrated grunt from the next table caught her attention. A young man sat surrounded by programming textbooks and crumpled papers, repeatedly pushing his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. His laptop screen displayed what appeared to be a presentation, though disaster might have been a more accurate description: clip art, scattered haphazardly across garish backgrounds, text cramped and barely readable. "That's an interesting design choice," Sarah commented, unable to help herself. The man looked up, his expression a mix of embarrassment and defensiveness. "It's for my startup pitch tomorrow," he muttered. "I'm better with code than this." He gestured at the screen with obvious disgust. Sarah found herself pulling her chair over. "I'm Sarah. I study graphic design, and I think I can help if you want." That's how it began. 5 hours, 3 coffee runs, and one completely redesigned presentation later, Michael Chen had not only secured his first investor meeting, but had also secured a first date with Sarah. Their courtship was a whirlwind of late-night coding sessions and impromptu design meetings. Sarah's artistic eye complemented Michael's technical brilliance perfectly. While his first startup fizzled, their relationship bloomed. When Michael decided to pursue his MBA, Sarah never hesitated to support them both with her freelance design work. "You believe in me more than I believe in myself," sometimes Michael told her one night, as they sat on their apartment floor, eating takeout Chinese food. "Once I make it big, I'll give you everything you've ever dreamed of." Sarah just smiled, twirling noodles around her plastic fork. "I already have everything I need right here." Their wedding reflected their circumstances, simple, intimate, and full of promise. Sarah wore a second-hand dress she'd altered herself. Michael's suit came from a consignment shop, and their rings were sterling silver instead of gold. But when they exchanged vows in the community center, decorated with fairy lights and paper lanterns Sarah had crafted, neither of them felt anything was missing. To us, Michael had toasted with sparkling cider, unable to afford champagne. To building our empire together. The first real changes came subtly, like shadows lengthening before sunset. Michael's second startup began gaining traction just as he finished his MBA. Suddenly, their cozy dinner dates turned into networking events. The man who once loved their quiet evenings of brainstorming now spent hours in important meetings with potential investors. "You should see the office spaces we're looking at," he'd announce, barely touching the dinner Sarah had prepared. Glass walls, city views, finally, something worthy of a real tech company. Sarah noticed his growing discomfort when colleagues visited their modest apartment. He started making excuses about their furniture, their neighborhood, even Sarah's freelance career. "Shouldn't you be thinking bigger?" He'd ask. "Maybe join a proper design firm? It doesn't look good for a startup founder's wife to be working from home." The man who had once proudly introduced her as his creative partner now referred to her simply as his wife, the story of their meet-cute in the library relegated to an embarrassing reminder of their struggling past. Their mismatched dishes disappeared one day, replaced by a matching set Michael had ordered. "We need to present a certain image now," he explained when Sarah discovered her beloved blue-rimmed bowl missing. She watched as success gradually stripped away the Michael she'd fallen in love with, replacing him with someone who measured worth in square footage and brand names. The final blow came when he suggested she hire a style consultant. "You need to dress the part of a tech entrepreneur's wife," he said, as if the woman who had supported his dreams in threadbare sweaters and second-hand shoes was somehow no longer good enough for the life he'd built, the life they'd built together. TechCrunch's headline screamed success: Cloudbase secures $50 M-Series B funding. Sarah stared at Michael's photo beneath the headline crisp suit, confident smile, not a trace of the disheveled student she'd met in the library. The article didn't mention her contributions to the company's branding, the countless nights she'd spent refining their visual identity. She wasn't even referenced as his wife. Their apartment, once a haven of shared dreams, had become a way station where they barely crossed paths. Michael returned home later each night, his conversations dominated by terms like market penetration and scaling strategies. When he did speak to her, his tone carried an edge of condescension, as if she couldn't possibly understand the complexities of his new world. "I've been invited to speak at Tech Summit next month," he announced one evening, scrolling through his phone while Sarah ate dinner alone. "They're flying me first class to Singapore." "That's wonderful," Sarah replied, pushing away her cold pasta. "Should I start looking at flights for myself?" Michael's pause spoke volumes. "I don't think that would be appropriate. This is a high-level industry event. You'd be bored." The distance between them grew like a crack in a windshield, spreading slowly until the whole structure threatened to shatter. Sarah watched helplessly as their photos disappeared from his social media, replaced by sleek office shots and investor meetings. Her husband transformed into a stranger who wore expensive watches and spoke of optimizing relationships like they were business metrics. The day Michael left wasn't marked by dramatic confrontations or tearful goodbyes. It was a Tuesday morning, unremarkable except for the leather suitcases waiting by the door when Sarah returned from her morning run. "I've outgrown this life," Michael stated, as if discussing a change in weather. "My lawyers will be in touch. I've already found an apartment in the tech district." He didn't look back as he walked out, leaving behind the faint scent of his new cologne and a deafening silence. Sarah stood in there now, her apartment, surrounded by the remnants of their shared life. The walls still held the art prints they'd collected together, now feeling like artifacts from a museum of lost dreams. The breakdown came in waves. First, the shock that numbed her for days, mechanically going through the motions of existence. Then the rage, hot and overwhelming, that had her hurling their wedding album against the wall at 3 a.m. Finally, the hollow emptiness that made even breathing feel like an insurmountable task. "I've outgrown this life," Michael stated, as if discussing a change in weather. "My lawyers will be in touch. I've already found an apartment in the tech district." He didn't look back as he walked out, leaving behind the faint scent of his new cologne and a deafening silence. Sarah stood in there now, her apartment, surrounded by the remnants of their shared life. The walls still held the art prints they'd collected together, now feeling like artifacts from a museum of lost dreams. The breakdown came in waves. First, the shock that numbed her for days, mechanically going through the motions of existence. Then the rage, hot and overwhelming, that had her hurling their wedding album against the wall at 3 a.m. Finally, the hollow emptiness that made even breathing feel like an insurmountable task. But it was in that emptiness that Sarah found her first seeds of strength. One morning, she caught her reflection in the mirror, eyes swollen, hair unwashed, and heard her grandmother's voice: "Rock bottom is where you discover what you're made of." That day, she showered, ordered takeout from their favorite Chinese restaurant, and ate it alone at their small kitchen table. Each bite tasted like grief and possibility mixed together. When the fortune cookie read, "New beginnings are disguised as painful endings." Sarah finally allowed herself to cry, not for the marriage she'd lost, but for the woman she was about to become. Sarah stared at her reflection in the dusty mirror of her new studio apartment, smaller even than their first place together. At 30, she was starting over with nothing but her design skills and a growing determination to prove Michael wasn't the only one who could build something meaningful. The irony wasn't lost on her that it was Michael's obsession with image that sparked her business idea. She'd been clearing out their old apartment, sorting through the designer clothes he'd insisted she buy, when she discovered the truth behind the luxury fashion industry's wasteful practices. Each piece represented not just personal memories, but a larger problem of environmental waste and ethical concerns. "There has to be a better way," she muttered, fingers tracing the fine stitching of a silk blouse that had cost more than their first month's rent. That night, she stayed up until dawn, sketching designs and researching sustainable fabric sources. Ecolux was born on a stack of recycled paper, its first business plan written on the back of discarded presentation drafts. The initial months tested every ounce of her resolve. Sarah sold everything of value, including the designer wardrobe Michael had curated for her, to fund her startup. Her tiny apartment became a workshop, with fabric samples hanging from every surface and a second-hand sewing machine dominating her kitchen table. "You're attempting to enter the most competitive market possible," her first potential investor said, barely glancing at her presentation. "Luxury consumers don't care about sustainability." Sarah left that meeting with burning cheeks, but strengthened determination. She'd helped build one successful company from nothing. She could do it again. This time it would reflect her values, not someone else's vision of success. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A local fashion blogger spotted Sarah wearing one of her prototypes, a blazer crafted from recycled ocean plastics, its design rivaling any luxury brand. The post went viral, catching the attention of environmentally conscious celebrities. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," said Lisa Chen, no relation, a prominent sustainable fashion advocate. "Luxury that doesn't cost the earth." Sarah's hands shook as she signed her first major contract, a small boutique agreeing to carry her initial collection. The order wasn't large, but it validated everything she'd been working toward. That night, alone in her studio, she allowed herself a moment of pride as she updated her business plan, now stained with coffee rings and determination. Her marketing strategy drew from everything she'd learned during Michael's rise. But where he had chased traditional metrics of success, Sarah built her brand on transparency and purpose. Each piece came with a story: the artisans who created it, the sustainable materials used, the environmental impact saved. The defining moment came when she landed her first major department store contract. The buyer had been skeptical initially, but Sarah's passion proved infectious. "Your products don't just look luxurious," he'd said, running his fingers over a sample. "They feel like the future." Working 16-hour days, Sarah expanded her collection piece by piece. She sourced innovative materials, leather alternatives made from pineapple fibers, silk-like fabric created from recycled bottles, buttons crafted from fallen wood. Each challenge forced her to become more creative, more resourceful. Her apartment's walls slowly filled with vision boards and collection plans, replacing the empty spaces where wedding photos had once hung. The pain of Michael's abandonment gradually transformed into fuel for her ambition. Every setback, every doubting investor, every production challenge became another opportunity to prove that success didn't require compromising one's values. The first time she saw someone on the street wearing one of her designs, a professional woman hurrying to work in an Ecolux suit, Sarah had to duck into a coffee shop to hide her tears. They weren't tears of sadness or even joy, but of pure vindication. She had created something that was changing not just her own life, but the lives of others. 1 year into her venture, Sarah stood in her first real office, surrounded by mood boards and sustainability certifications. Her small team occupied a converted warehouse space, its industrial aesthetic perfectly matching her brand's ethos of beautiful functionality. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now had the glass walls and city views Michael had once dreamed of, but she'd achieved them entirely on her own terms. Ecolux's headquarters buzzed with the energy of a company in rapid expansion. Sarah walked through the open-plan office, now occupying 3 floors of a renovated industrial building in Seattle's design district. The walls, made from reclaimed wood and recycled materials, showcased their journey from a one-woman operation to an emerging force in sustainable luxury fashion. "The Nordstrom buyers are here," her assistant whispered, hurrying alongside her. Sarah nodded, straightening her signature Ecolux blazer, a piece from their best-selling Ocean collection made entirely from recycled marine plastics and organic cotton. In the conference room, Sarah presented their latest innovation, a revolutionary fabric developed in partnership with marine conservation groups. "We're not just creating fashion," she explained, passing around samples. "We're proving that luxury and sustainability aren't mutually exclusive." The contract she signed that afternoon would put Ecolux in every major Nordstrom store nationwide. It was a far cry from her first sale to a local boutique, but Sarah maintained the same principles that had guided her from the start. Each piece still came with its sustainability impact report, detailing water saved, emissions reduced, and communities supported. Her innovative approach caught the attention of industry leaders. When Vogue featured Ecolux in their Future of Fashion issue, they didn't just focus on the designs, they highlighted the company's transparent supply chain and commitment to ethical manufacturing. "Sarah Chen isn't just creating clothes," the article declared. "She's revolutionizing how luxury brands approach sustainability." Partnership offers flooded in. Major fashion houses wanted to collaborate, tech companies sought her expertise in sustainable manufacturing, and environmental organizations wanted her advocacy. Sarah chose her alliances carefully, prioritizing impact over immediate profit. The company's expansion into Asia proved particularly successful. In a market where luxury brands often struggled with authenticity, Ecolux's commitment to transparency resonated deeply. Their Shanghai flagship store, built entirely from sustainable materials, became a case study in green architecture. "Your profit margins are impressive," noted a venture capitalist during a funding round. "But what's more impressive is how you've achieved them without compromising your values." Sarah had learned from watching Michael's mistakes. While he had chased rapid growth at any cost, she built her empire on a foundation of sustainability, both environmental and financial. Her team grew strategically, each new hire chosen not just for their skills but for their commitment to the company's mission. When Forbes named her one of their 40 under 40, the article emphasized how Ecolux had transformed from a startup into an industry leader. Their manufacturing processes had become the gold standard for sustainable luxury, with competitors scrambling to adopt similar practices. But Sarah's proudest achievement wasn't the awards or recognition, it was the impact reports showing tons of plastic diverted from oceans, gallons of water saved, and communities supported through their ethical manufacturing partnerships. She'd created more than a successful company, she'd proven that profit and purpose could coexist. Walking through her design studio one evening, Sarah paused at the wall displaying their first collection. The pieces looked almost primitive compared to their current offerings, but they represented something crucial the moment she'd stopped defining success by someone else's standards. Chen, her assistant, appeared with the latest sales reports. "The new collection has exceeded projections by 200%, and the Sustainable Fashion Council wants you to keynote their annual conference." Sarah smiled, remembering the investors who doubted that luxury consumers would care about sustainability. Now, Ecolux's waiting lists grew longer with each collection, proving that true luxury could be measured in more than thread count and brand names. The Sustainable Business Summit's main hall hummed with anticipation. Sarah adjusted her microphone, preparing to deliver her keynote address. 15 years had transformed her from abandoned wife into one of the most influential voices in sustainable luxury fashion. From her position backstage, she scanned the audience and froze. There, in the third row, sat Michael Chen. Time had weathered him, his hair showed traces of grey, and his once immaculate suit looked slightly worn. The tech wonderkind who had once abandoned her for bigger dreams now sat among the attendees of her keynote speech. The irony wasn't lost on her. After leaving her, Michael's success had proven temporary. His subsequent ventures had failed spectacularly, each one chasing profit without purpose. The tech blogs that had once heralded him as a visionary now used his name as a cautionary tale of hubris and unsustainable growth. And now, please welcome our keynote speaker, Sarah Chen, founder and CEO of Ecolux. Sarah stepped onto the stage, her Ecolux signature piece, a blazer made from recycled materials, gleaming under the spotlight. As she began her speech about sustainable business practices, her eyes occasionally met Michael's. She saw recognition dawn on his face, followed by disbelief, and finally, something that looked like shame. Success isn't just about profit margins, she said, her voice steady. It's about building something that outlasts us, something that makes the world better than we found it. After the speech, she knew he would approach her. She waited in the green room, reminiscing about their last encounter in their old apartment. When he appeared in the doorway, he looked smaller somehow, humbled by time and failure. "Sarah," he said, his voice catching. I've been following Ecolux's rise. I should have known it was you. The attention to detail, the innovative approach, it's everything you tried to bring to my companies." She gestured for him to sit. "It's been a long time, Michael. Too long," he admitted, sinking into a chair. "I've thought about you every time I saw Ecolux in the news. Every time I passed one of your stores. I kept thinking about how I threw away the best partnership I ever had in business and in life." Sarah studied him, noting the worn edges of his cuffs, the slight fraying of his collar. What happened to Cloudbase? Michael's laugh was bitter, crashed and burned. Turns out, chasing profit at any cost isn't sustainable. Each venture after that failed faster than the last. I became known as the guy who could start things but couldn't maintain them. He paused, looking around the green room. "Unlike you built something real, something lasting." "I learned from our marriage," Sarah said quietly. "You taught me what not to do. Every time I faced a decision about growth versus values, I thought about how your choices changed you. It helped me stay true to my vision." Michael's eyes filled with tears. "I've spent 15 years chasing what you've achieved, not just the success, the respect, the purpose. I threw away everything that mattered for things that didn't last." Sarah felt the last traces of old pain dissolving. "We all have to learn our own lessons, Michael. Some of us just take longer than others." "Is there any chance," he started, then stopped, reading the gentle but firm expression on her face. "No, I suppose not. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. What I had, what I lost, what you've become, I understand it all." Sarah stood at the conference room window, watching the city lights flicker to life in the dusk. Behind her, Michael waited in silence, the weight of 15 years hanging between them. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said finally, turning to face him. "Not for your sake, but for mine. Holding on to that pain would have prevented me from becoming who I needed to be." Michael's shoulders sagged with visible relief. "You've built something extraordinary, Sarah. Not just Ecolux, but yourself. I see that now." "Success isn't what I thought it was back then," she replied, gesturing to the Ecolux headquarters spread out below them. "It's not about the corner office or the profit margins. It's about creating value, real value in the world." She pulled out her phone, showing him Ecolux's latest impact report. "Each piece we create helps clean our oceans, supports sustainable farming, and provides fair wages to artisans. That's true wealth, Michael. Not the kind that sits in bank accounts, but the kind that ripples outward, touching countless lives." "I wish I had understood that sooner," he admitted. "Every venture I started after Cloudbase failed because I was chasing the wrong things. Money without meaning, success without substance." Sarah smiled gently. "Sometimes we need to lose everything to find what truly matters. Our divorce, it broke me, but it also rebuilt me. Stronger, wiser, more purposeful." She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out an old photo their wedding day, both of them young and dreaming of empire. We were right about one thing back then. We did change the world, just not in the way we expected. Michael studied the photo, touching it gently. You changed it. I just learned from my mistakes. Eventually. That's changed too, Sarah said. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself. As they parted ways, Sarah felt the last piece of her past settling into place. The young woman in the thrift store wedding dress and the CEO of Ecolux were finally one and the same, not despite her journey, but because of it. Later that evening, addressing her team, Sarah shared the lesson she'd learned: true luxury isn't about exclusivity or price tags. It's about creating something meaningful, something that enriches not just our lives, but the lives of others. Success isn't measured by what we gain, but by what we give back. The story of Sarah Chen and Ecolux became more than just a business success. It became a testament to the power of purpose over profit, of sustainable vision over quick gains. And somewhere in the city, a humbled Michael Chen began his own journey of transformation, having finally learned that real wealth couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. In the end, their story wasn't about revenge or regret. It was about growth, forgiveness, and the profound understanding that sometimes losing everything is the first step to finding something greater.